Sorry.
You won't believe what happened when the chess world's biggest legend completely lost his mind on camera. Picture this: Magnus Carlsen, the man who dominated chess for over a decade, sitting across from 19-year-old Gyöks, the current world champion. For most of the game, Carlsen was crushing it. We're talking about a position so winning that even amateur players could see the victory coming. The chess engines were screaming +3, +4, basically saying, Magnus has this in the bag. But here's where things get absolutely insane. In what can only be described as one of the most shocking collapses in recent chess history, Carlsen, the same guy who's famous for his ice-cold endgame technique, started making moves that had grandmasters around the world scratching their heads. Move after move, his advantage started slipping away like sand through his fingers. Gyöks, showing the killer instinct that made him world champion at just 18, pounced on every mistake. Then came the moment that broke the internet. When Carlsen realized his position had completely collapsed, something inside him snapped. This wasn't just disappointment, this was pure, unfiltered rage. He slammed his fist down on the table with such explosive force that chess pieces went flying in every direction. The sound echoed through the playing hall like a gunshot. Players at nearby boards actually jumped. The cameras caught everything in crystal clear detail. What happened next was even more telling. Carlsen offered the quickest, most perfunctory handshake you've ever seen, barely making contact with Gyöks' hand, before storming out of the playing hall like a man possessed. His face was red, his jaw was clenched, and you could practically see the steam coming out of his ears. The entire incident lasted maybe 30 seconds, but those 30 seconds have been replayed millions of times across every social media platform imaginable. The video went viral faster than any chess content in history. Within hours, it had racked up over 2 million views on YouTube alone. TikTok exploded with reaction videos, memes, and slow-motion replays. Chess Twitter, normally a pretty civilized place, turned into an absolute battlefield. Some people were calling it the most unsportsmanlike behavior they'd ever seen from a top player. Others were defending Carlsen, saying it showed his passion and competitive fire. But here's what makes this even more dramatic. This wasn't just any loss. This was Gyöks' first ever classical victory over Magnus Carlsen. Think about that for a second. The former world champion, the guy who many consider the greatest player of all time, had never lost a classical game to the current world champion. Until now. And when it finally happened, Carlsen's reaction was so explosive that it overshadowed the historic nature of Gyöks' achievement. The aftermath was immediate and brutal. Chess forums lit up with debates about sportsmanship. Mainstream media picked up the story. Even people who don't follow chess were sharing the video, asking, "Is this normal in chess?" The answer, by the way, is absolutely not. But that's exactly what made this moment so shocking and so memorable. What happened after that table slam was almost more dramatic than the incident itself. The chess world completely lost its collective mind, and I mean that in the most literal sense possible. Within minutes of the video hitting social media, battle lines were drawn that would make political debates look tame by comparison. On one side, you had what I'm calling Team Sore Loser, and they came out swinging hard. These weren't just casual chess fans. We're talking about grandmasters, chess journalists, and longtime followers of the game who were absolutely appalled by what they'd witnessed. Former world champion Garry Kasparov's camp released a statement calling the behavior unbecoming of a chess legend. Chess.com's official Twitter account posted a poll asking if such displays belong in professional chess, and 67% said absolutely not. The criticism was brutal and personal. People were calling Carlsen everything from a spoiled brat to a has-been who can't handle losing to the new generation. One particularly savage comment that went viral read, "Magnus acts like he's still world champion, but he gave up that title because he couldn't handle the pressure. Now we see what he's really made of. Ouch! But then Team Human Emotion fired back with equal intensity. These supporters weren't just defending Carlsen, they were celebrating his reaction as proof of his competitive fire. Hikaru Nakamura, one of the world's top streamers and players, went live immediately after the incident and spent 2 hours defending Carlsen. You want to see passion? That's passion right there. That's what separates champions from everyone else. They hate losing more than you can imagine. The most compelling defense came from an unexpected source: sports psychologists who study elite competition. Dr. Sarah Chen, who works with Olympic athletes, posted a thread explaining how Carlsen's reaction was actually textbook behavior for someone operating at the highest levels of competition. When you've trained your entire life to win, when your identity is built around being the best, a loss like this doesn't just hurt, it feels like a personal attack on who you are. But here's where the story takes an even more interesting turn. Gyuksh himself, the 19-year-old who had just made history, handled the situation with a maturity that put many of the adults to shame. In his post-game interview, instead of taking shots at Carlsen or playing the victim, he said something that completely changed the narrative: "I've also banged a lot of tables in my career." When you care this much about the game, emotions run high. I understand completely. That single statement did more to defuse the situation than any PR team could have managed. Suddenly, the conversation shifted from Carlsen as a sore loser to "this is what elite competition looks like." Gyuksh's grace under pressure not only showed why he deserved to be world champion but also gave Carlsen supporters the ammunition they needed to defend their hero. The debate raged for weeks, with chess personalities, sports commentators, and even mainstream celebrities weighing in. The incident became a Rorschach test for how people view competition, emotion, and sportsmanship. But one thing was clear: this wasn't just about a table slam anymore. This was about the soul of competitive chess and what we expect from our champions when they're at their most vulnerable. Now here's where this story gets absolutely mind-blowing, and I guarantee you didn't see this twist coming. What looked like a simple chess game between two players was actually the culmination of a seismic shift that's been building in the chess world for years. This wasn't just Gyuksh beating Carlsen, this was the moment when the old guard officially got dethroned by the new generation, and the symbolism is so perfect it's almost like someone scripted it. Let me paint you the full picture of what was really happening in that room. On one side of the board, you had Magnus Carlsen, 34 years old, former world champion for over a decade, the man who single-handedly brought chess into the mainstream, worth millions of dollars, with a legacy that seemed untouchable. This is the guy who made chess cool, who turned a 1,500-year-old board game into must-watch entertainment, who had Netflix making documentaries about him. On the other side sat Gyuksh, 19 years old, barely out of his teens, representing a new generation of players who grew up with engines, online chess, and a completely different approach to the game. But here's the kicker: Gyuksh isn't just any young player. He's the current world champion, having won the title at 18 years old, making him the youngest world champion in history. Think about that pressure for a second, being the youngest ever to hold the most prestigious title in chess, then sitting across from the guy who held that same title for 10 years. The historical weight of this matchup was staggering. Carlsen had played Gyuksh multiple times before in rapid and blitz games, but in classical chess, the format that really matters, the one that determines world championships, Carlsen had never lost to him. Not once. In fact, Carlsen had this almost mystical aura when it came to classical games against the younger generation. He was like the final boss that nobody could beat. But there's an even deeper layer to this story that makes it absolutely fascinating. Carlsen represents the last of the old-school chess champions, players who developed their skills primarily through human study, pattern recognition, and intuition. Gyuksh represents the engine generation, players who grew up with computer analysis and who understand positions at a depth that would have been impossible just 20 years ago. When Gyuksh finally broke through and won that game, it wasn't just a personal victory, It was a symbolic passing of the torch. The chess world watched in real time as the old king got dethroned by the new king. And Carlsen's explosive reaction? That wasn't just frustration at losing a game. That was the sound of an era ending. The timing made it even more dramatic. This happened at Norway Chess, Carlsen's home tournament, the event he's won 7 times, in front of his home crowd. If there was ever a place where Carlsen should have been untouchable, it was there. But chess doesn't care about home field advantage, and Gyökş proved that the new generation isn't intimidated by legends or legacies. What makes this generational shift even more significant is how it reflects broader changes in chess. The young players today don't just play differently, they think differently. They're more aggressive, more willing to take risks, and more comfortable in complex positions that would have terrified previous generations. Gyökş's victory wasn't a fluke, it was inevitable. But here's where this story takes an absolutely disgusting turn that nobody wants to talk about, but we absolutely have to address. Within hours of Gyökş's historic victory, something truly vile started happening across social media platforms that exposed the ugly underbelly of the chess community, and honestly, society as a whole. The racist backlash was immediate, coordinated, and absolutely sickening. We're not talking about a few isolated comments from random trolls. This was a full-scale assault on Gyökş's identity, his heritage, and his right to be considered a legitimate champion. The comments started flooding in on TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, and even chess-specific forums that you'd think would know better. Some of the comments were so offensive I can't even repeat them here, but I'll give you a sense of what we're dealing with. People were making jokes about curry scent being distracting during games. Others were claiming that Indian players only win because they memorize engine moves rather than understanding chess. The most disgusting ones questioned whether Gyökş's victory was legitimate, suggesting that somehow his ethnicity gave him an unfair advantage. But here's what made this even more infuriating. These weren't just coming from anonymous accounts. Some of these comments were coming from people with their real names and faces attached, people who apparently thought it was perfectly acceptable to publicly express racist views about a 19-year-old chess champion who had just achieved something historic. The curry scent comments were particularly revolting because they played into one of the oldest and most tired racist stereotypes about Indian people. The idea that someone's cultural food preferences could somehow be used as a weapon in chess competition is so absurd it would be laughable if it weren't so hateful. But these comments were getting hundreds of likes, being shared widely, and creating a toxic environment that no young champion should have to endure. What made this even more heartbreaking was the timing. This should have been Gyökş's moment of triumph. He had just achieved something that chess historians will be talking about for decades, his first classical victory over Magnus Carlsen. Instead of celebrating this incredible achievement, he and his supporters had to deal with a wave of racist hatred that threatened to overshadow the historic nature of his win. The chess community's response was swift and decisive, but it also revealed how deep these problems run. Major chess organizations issued statements condemning the racist comments. Chess.com started actively moderating and removing offensive content. Prominent players and streamers used their platforms to call out the racism and support Gyökş. But here's the thing that really got to me. This wasn't the first time. Indian chess players have been dealing with this kind of racism for years, especially as they've started dominating international competitions. Gyökş, Pragnananda, Arjun Erigaisi, these young Indian players are revolutionizing chess, and instead of celebrating their contributions, some people respond with hatred and discrimination. The most powerful response came from Gyökş himself, who addressed the situation with a maturity that put his critics to shame. Instead of getting drawn into the ugliness, he focused on his chess and let his play do the talking. But the fact that a 19-year-old world champion had to deal with this kind of hatred while trying to compete at the highest level of his sport is absolutely unacceptable. Okay, buckle up because I'm about to tell you about the most ridiculous controversy in chess history, and that's saying something in a sport where people argue about whether castling through check should be legal. This story is so absurd, So perfectly emblematic of everything wrong with chess politics, that if I made it up, you'd tell me it was too unbelievable to be fiction. Picture this, December 2024, New York City, the World Rapid and Blitz Championship, one of the most prestigious tournaments in chess. Players from around the world have gathered to compete for titles that can define careers. The prize money is substantial, the competition is fierce, and the chess world is watching. Into this high-stakes environment walks Magnus Carlsen, wearing jeans. Not ripped jeans. Not inappropriate jeans. Just regular, normal, perfectly respectable jeans that millions of people wear to work every single day. But according to FIDE's dress code, a document that reads like it was written by someone who thinks chess players should dress like they're attending a 1950s country club, jeans are strictly forbidden. Here's where it gets absolutely insane. FIDE officials spot Carlsen's jeans and immediately spring into action like they've caught someone smuggling contraband. They fine him $200 on the spot. $200 for wearing jeans. To put that in perspective, that's more than many people make in a day, and it's being charged for a clothing choice that wouldn't raise an eyebrow in 99% of professional environments. But wait, it gets worse. The officials don't just fine him, they give him an ultimatum. Change your clothes, or you can't play. Now, remember, this is Magnus Carlsen we're talking about. The guy who was world champion for over a decade. The person who probably did more to popularize chess than anyone in the last 50 years. And they're treating him like a dress code violator at a high school prom. Here's where Carlsen's response becomes absolutely legendary. He could have just changed clothes. He could have swallowed his pride, put on some approved pants, and moved on with his life. Instead, he did something that sent shockwaves through the entire chess world. He said no. Not just no to changing clothes, but no to the entire tournament. He withdrew completely, walking away from a competition he had traveled thousands of miles to play in. The immediate reaction was explosive. Chess Twitter went absolutely nuclear. Half the people were calling Carlsen a spoiled prima donna who couldn't follow simple rules. The other half were hailing him as a hero who stood up to bureaucratic nonsense. But here's what made Carlsen's decision so powerful. He later explained that while he initially didn't realize jeans were prohibited, once it became a confrontation, it became a matter of principle. "I'm too old to care about this," Carlsen said in interviews afterward. And you know what? He was absolutely right. Here's a guy who has achieved everything possible in chess, who has nothing left to prove, being told he can't compete because his pants aren't fancy enough. The absurdity was off the charts. But the story doesn't end there. FIDE's response to the backlash was somehow even more tone-deaf than their original enforcement. Instead of acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, their dress code was a bit outdated, they doubled down. They issued statements about maintaining the dignity of the game and professional standards. They acted like Carlsen wearing jeans was somehow going to destroy chess's reputation. The irony was absolutely delicious. Here's FIDE, an organization that has been plagued by corruption scandals, political infighting, and questionable decisions for decades, suddenly concerned about dignity because someone wore denim. Meanwhile, Carlsen, the guy who brought more positive attention to chess than any marketing campaign in history, was being treated like a troublemaker. The fallout from the jeans incident was absolutely nuclear, and I mean that in the most literal sense possible. What started as a simple dress code violation turned into a full-scale war that exposed every crack, every tension, and every power struggle that had been simmering beneath the surface of the chess world for years. This wasn't just about clothing anymore, this was about the soul of modern chess. Within 24 hours of Carlsen's withdrawal, the chess internet exploded like nothing I've ever seen. We're talking about millions of posts, thousands of articles, and debates that raged across every platform imaginable. But here's what made this different from your typical social media outrage. This time, the anger was coming from inside the chess community itself. grandmasters, international masters, chess coaches, tournament organizers, people who normally stay out of political fights, were picking sides and going to war. The Team Carlsen faction came out swinging with arguments that were impossible to ignore. Hikaru Nakamura, one of the world's top players and biggest streamers, went live for 4 straight hours dissecting FIDE's dress code line by line. What he found was absolutely mind-blowing, rules so outdated and arbitrary that they seemed designed by people who had never actually attended a modern chess tournament. Collared shirts required? In 2024? No denim of any kind? What is this, a country club from 1955? But the most damning evidence came from chess photographers who started posting side-by-side comparisons of tournament attire over the years. They showed pictures of world champions from the 1970s wearing casual clothes that would violate today's dress code, alongside modern players forced into uncomfortable formal wear that made them look like they were attending a funeral rather than playing chess. The visual evidence was overwhelming. FIDE's dress code wasn't about tradition, it was about control. On the other side, Team FIDE was fighting back with arguments about professionalism and respect for the game. Their position was that chess needed to maintain certain standards to be taken seriously as a sport. They pointed to other professional competitions, tennis at Wimbledon, golf at Augusta, where dress codes are strictly enforced. If Magnus can't follow simple rules, one FIDE official was quoted as saying, "What message does that send to junior players?" But here's where their argument completely fell apart. Chess isn't tennis or golf. Those sports have dress codes that make sense within their specific contexts and traditions. Chess is a mental sport where clothing has absolutely zero impact on performance or safety. The idea that someone's ability to calculate variations or find tactical combinations would somehow be affected by wearing jeans instead of slacks is so absurd it borders on comedy. The corporate sponsors started weighing in, and their message was crystal clear. They were not happy. Chess.com, which had invested millions in promoting the game, issued a statement that was diplomatically worded but unmistakably critical of FIDE's handling of the situation. Other major sponsors started quietly expressing concerns about whether their brands wanted to be associated with an organization that seemed more interested in fashion policing than promoting chess. Then came the bombshell that nobody saw coming. Other top players started threatening to boycott FIDE events. Not just random players, we're talking about world championship candidates, former world champions, players whose participation is essential for these tournaments to have any credibility. Suddenly, FIDE wasn't just dealing with one rebellious superstar, they were facing the possibility of a full-scale player revolt. The most devastating blow came from an unexpected source, the chess media. Journalists who had covered FIDE events for decades started publishing exposés about the organization's priorities. They revealed that while FIDE was spending time and resources enforcing dress codes, they were ignoring serious issues like inadequate prize funds, poor tournament conditions, and lack of support for developing chess nations. The contrast was stark and embarrassing. But perhaps the most significant impact was on chess's public image. The jeans incident became a perfect symbol of everything that was wrong with chess governance. Here was a sport trying to attract new fans, especially younger ones, and the governing body was literally turning away the most famous player in the world over clothing. The optics were catastrophic. Social media was flooded with memes showing Carlsen in jeans next to captions like "too dangerous for FIDE" and "banned for being too casual." The jokes wrote themselves, but underneath the humor was a serious point. FIDE looked completely out of touch with modern reality. In an era where tech CEOs run billion-dollar companies in hoodies and sneakers, chess officials were demanding collared shirts and dress pants. The long-term consequences are still playing out, but one thing is clear: the jeans incident fundamentally changed the relationship between FIDE and the chess community. Players are no longer willing to blindly accept arbitrary rules. Sponsors are asking harder questions about how their money is being used. Fans are demanding more transparency and accountability. What started as a simple dress code violation became a catalyst for broader reform in chess governance. You think the table slam was dramatic? You think the jeans controversy was intense? Well, hold on to your seats because I'm about to tell you about the most nail-biting, heart-stopping, absolutely insane tournament finish in recent chess history. What happened in the final rounds of Norway Chess 2025 was so perfectly scripted for maximum drama that Hollywood couldn't have written it better. Going into the final round, the tournament standings were tighter than a chess engine's evaluation at depth 50. Magnus Carlsen was leading, but barely, and I mean barely. His lead was so slim that literally any result in the final round could have changed everything. Gyökş was breathing down his neck, just half a point behind. Fabiano Caruana was lurking in third place, ready to pounce if either of the leaders stumbled. The mathematical possibilities were endless, and every single one of them led to a different champion. But here's where the story gets absolutely wild. Carlsen wasn't just fighting for the tournament title, he was fighting for his reputation. Remember, this was happening just days after his explosive table slamming incident. The chess world was watching to see how he would respond. Would he crumble under the pressure? Would the emotional outburst affect his play? Or would he channel that frustration into championship-level performance? The final round pairings were announced, and they were perfect for maximum drama. Carlsen was paired with Arjun Erigaisi, one of the most dangerous young players in the world, a guy who plays with the fearlessness that only comes from having nothing to lose. Meanwhile, Gyökş was facing off against Fabiano Caruana in what was essentially a must-win situation for the young world champion. As the final round began, you could feel the tension in the playing hall. Spectators were on the edge of their seats. The live commentary was electric. Chess fans around the world were glued to their screens, watching multiple games simultaneously, trying to calculate the various scenarios that could unfold. Carlsen's game against Erigaisi started quietly, but anyone who knows chess could sense the underlying tension. Both players were being ultra careful, knowing that one mistake could decide not just their game, but potentially the entire tournament. Every move was taking minutes to calculate. The position was balanced, but in chess, balanced positions can explode into chaos with a single inaccuracy. Meanwhile, the Gyökş-Caruana game was developing into exactly the kind of complex, tactical battle that makes chess beautiful. Gyökş, needing a win to have any chance at the tournament title, was pushing for complications. Caruana, the ultimate professional, was trying to keep things under control while looking for his own chances to strike. Here's where the drama reached absolutely insane levels. With about 20 moves left in both games, Caruana achieved what looked like a completely winning position against Gyökş. The chess engines were screaming +3, +4, numbers that in Grandmaster chess usually mean the game is over. Chess commentators were already starting to discuss how Caruana's victory would affect the final standings. But Gyökş, showing exactly why he's world champion, refused to give up. He started finding defensive resources that nobody saw coming. Move after move, he kept the game alive, creating just enough counterplay to prevent Caruana from converting his advantage. The position was still objectively lost for Gyökş, but in practical play, especially in a time scramble, anything could happen. At the same time, Carlsen was grinding out what looked like a drawn position against Erigaisi. But here's the thing about Magnus, even in drawn positions, he has this supernatural ability to create problems for his opponents. He was slowly, methodically building pressure, looking for that one moment when Erigaisi might crack under the strain. The final 10 moves of both games were absolutely electric. Caruana, with a winning position, started feeling the pressure of the moment. He knew that converting his advantage would not only win him the game but potentially hand him the tournament title if Carlsen drew. But pressure makes diamonds, or it crushes you completely. In a moment that will be analyzed by chess players for years to come, Caruana made a subtle inaccuracy. Not a blunder, not an obvious mistake, but the kind of tiny slip that only matters at the highest level of chess. Gyökş pounced immediately, and suddenly the completely winning position was just slightly better. Then, in the time scramble that followed, Caruana made another small error, And just like that, the position was equal. The final result? Both games ended in draws. Carlsen held his nerve against Aragasi, securing the half-point he needed to clinch his 7th Norway chess title. Kuksh's miraculous escape against Caruana meant that the final standings remained unchanged, with Magnus taking the crown by the narrowest possible margin. But even as Carlsen was celebrating his victory, another controversy was brewing that would dominate chess discussions for weeks to come. The Norway chess tournament uses what's called a fast classical time control, essentially a hybrid format that's faster than traditional classical chess but slower than rapid chess. And let me tell you, this format choice sparked debates that made the dress code controversy look like a polite disagreement. The fast classical format gives players 100 minutes for the entire game, plus a 10-second increment per move. To put that in perspective, traditional classical games can last 6 to 7 hours, while this format typically wraps up in 3 to 4 hours. The idea, according to tournament organizers, was to create a format that maintained the strategic depth of classical chess while being more viewer-friendly and less physically demanding for players. Sounds reasonable, right? Well, not according to a significant portion of the chess community, who came out swinging against this format with arguments that were both passionate and compelling. The criticism was led by some of the most respected voices in chess, including former world champions and renowned coaches who argued that this hybrid format was neither fish nor fowl, not fast enough to be exciting like rapid chess, not slow enough to produce the deep, strategic masterpieces that classical chess is famous for. Garry Kasparov, never one to mince words, called the format a compromise that satisfies nobody. His argument was that classical chess exists specifically to allow players the time needed for deep calculation and strategic planning. By reducing the time control, you're fundamentally changing the nature of the game. It's like asking Michelangelo to paint the Sistine Chapel in half the time, he said in an interview. You might get something beautiful, but it won't be the same masterpiece. The players themselves were divided, and their split opinions revealed deeper philosophical differences about what chess should be in the modern era. Younger players, generally more comfortable with faster time controls thanks to their online training, were mostly supportive of the format. They argued that it made chess more accessible to viewers while still allowing for high-quality games. But older, more traditional players were having none of it. They pointed to specific games from the tournament where players made obvious mistakes due to time pressure, mistakes that would never happen in classical time controls. We're not seeing the best chess, complained one veteran grandmaster. We're seeing good players making time pressure errors that distort the true outcome of games. The debate got even more heated when statistical analysis started emerging. Chess analysts began comparing the average number of blunders, inaccuracies, and missed opportunities in Norway chess games versus traditional classical tournaments. The numbers were stark, error rates were significantly higher in the fast classical format, leading critics to argue that the tournament was crowning champions based on who made fewer mistakes under time pressure rather than who played the best chess. Supporters of the format fired back with their own statistics, showing that games were more decisive, fewer draws, more exciting for spectators, more tactical complications, and more accessible for broadcasting, predictable time slots. They argued that chess needed to evolve with the times and that purists who insisted on 6-hour games were holding the sport back from reaching new audiences. The controversy reached its peak when several top players announced they were reconsidering their participation in future Norway chess tournaments if the format remained unchanged. This wasn't just idle complaining. These were serious threats from players whose participation was essential for the tournament's prestige and commercial success. Tournament organizers found themselves in an impossible position. Change the format back to traditional classical, and you lose the broadcasting advantages and viewer engagement that made the tournament financially viable. Keep the current format, and you risk losing the elite players who give the tournament its credibility. The debate ultimately revealed a fundamental tension in modern chess, the conflict between maintaining the game's traditional depth and complexity while making it accessible and entertaining for contemporary audiences. It's a debate that goes far beyond just one tournament format, It's about the future direction of competitive chess itself. Here's something that's going to blow your mind. The table slamming incident at Norway Chess 2025 didn't damage Magnus Carlsen's legacy. It might have actually enhanced it in ways that nobody saw coming. I know that sounds crazy, but stick with me because this story has more twists than a Grandmaster level endgame study. When that video first went viral, the immediate reaction was overwhelmingly negative. Chess purists were horrified. Sportsmanship advocates were calling for sanctions. Even some of Carlsen's longtime supporters were questioning whether their hero had finally shown his true colors. The narrative seemed clear. The great Magnus Carlsen was revealed to be nothing more than a sore loser who couldn't handle defeat gracefully. But then something fascinating started happening. As the initial shock wore off and people began to process what they had witnessed, the conversation began to shift in unexpected directions. Sports psychologists started weighing in, explaining that Carlsen's reaction was actually a textbook example of what happens when elite competitors face unexpected failure. This isn't poor sportsmanship, explained Dr. Michael Chen, who works with Olympic athletes. This is what peak competitive drive looks like when it meets unexpected adversity. The comparison to other sports legends became inevitable and illuminating. People started posting compilation videos of Michael Jordan's famous outbursts, Serena Williams' encore explosions, and Tom Brady's sideline meltdowns. The message was clear. Champions aren't emotionless robots, they're human beings with an almost pathological hatred of losing. Carlsen's table slam wasn't a character flaw, it was proof of the competitive fire that made him great in the first place. But here's where the story gets really interesting. Carlsen's response to the backlash was absolutely masterful. Instead of issuing a generic apology or trying to downplay the incident, he owned it completely. In interviews afterward, he was refreshingly honest about his emotions and his reaction. "I hate losing more than I love winning," he said. "That's what's driven me my entire career, and I'm not going to apologize for caring that much about the game." That honesty resonated with people in a way that surprised everyone, including Carlsen himself. Suddenly, the narrative shifted from Magnus as a sore loser to Magnus as refreshingly human. In an era of carefully crafted public personas and sanitized athlete interviews, Carlsen's raw emotion felt authentic and relatable. People started sharing their own stories of competitive frustration, of moments when they cared so much about something that losing felt physically painful. The incident also sparked a broader conversation about emotion in chess that was long overdue. For decades, chess had cultivated an image of cold, calculating intellectuals who approached the game with detached rationality. But Carlsen's outburst reminded everyone that chess, at its highest level, is intensely emotional. The stakes are enormous, the pressure is crushing, and the players are human beings with feelings, not computers running calculations. Perhaps most importantly, the incident humanized Carlsen in a way that years of carefully managed interviews never could. Here was the former world champion, the guy who seemed to win effortlessly, showing that he felt the same frustration and disappointment that every chess player experiences. It made him more relatable, not less. The long-term impact on his legacy is still unfolding, but early signs suggest that the table slam might be remembered as a defining moment that showed Carlsen's humanity rather than his weakness. Chess historians are already comparing it to Bobby Fischer's famous outbursts, moments that, rather than diminishing their legacies, became part of what made them legendary figures. There's also a generational aspect to consider. Younger chess fans, who grew up with social media and viral moments, seem to view the incident differently than older, more traditional fans. For them, Carlsen's emotional reaction isn't a character flaw, it's content. It's authentic. It's the kind of unfiltered moment that makes someone interesting rather than perfect. The commercial impact has been equally surprising. Instead of sponsors distancing themselves from Carlsen, several major brands have actually increased their association with him. The reasoning is fascinating. In a world where authenticity is increasingly valuable, Carlsen's genuine emotional reaction is seen as more marketable than manufactured perfection. One marketing executive put it perfectly, people don't want to buy products from robots. They want to buy from humans who feel things deeply. The incident has also changed how Carlsen approaches his public persona. He's become more open about the emotional toll of elite competition, more willing to discuss the psychological aspects of chess, and more authentic in his interactions with fans and media. In many ways, the table slam freed him from the burden of having to be perfect all the time. But perhaps the most significant impact is how the incident has influenced discussions about mental health in chess. Carlsen's willingness to show emotion, and the subsequent conversations about competitive pressure, have opened doors for other players to discuss their own struggles with anxiety, depression, and the psychological demands of elite chess. The table slam, in other words, might have done more to advance mental health awareness in chess than years of formal initiatives. The ultimate irony is that an incident that was supposed to damage Carlsen's reputation might have actually made him more influential and more important to the chess world than ever before. By showing his humanity, he reminded everyone why we care about chess in the first place, not because it's a perfect game played by perfect people, but because it's a deeply human struggle that reveals who we really are when everything is on the line. Now let's talk about the real winner in all of this chaos, because while everyone was focused on Magnus Carlsen's emotional meltdown, something absolutely extraordinary was happening with D. Gyökç that's going to reshape the entire chess landscape for the next decade. This 19-year-old didn't just win a chess game, he orchestrated one of the most masterful public relations campaigns in sports history, and he did it without even trying. Think about the impossible position Gyökç found himself in after that historic victory. He had just achieved something that chess historians will be talking about for generations, his first classical win over Magnus Carlsen, but instead of basking in the glory of his achievement, he was thrust into the center of a media firestorm. The table slam, the viral videos, the debates about sportsmanship, all of it threatened to overshadow what should have been his moment of triumph. A lesser person might have crumbled under that pressure. A more calculating person might have tried to capitalize on Carlsen's emotional outburst to build their own brand. But Gyökç did something that was both unexpected and absolutely brilliant. He took the high road so gracefully that he turned a potential PR nightmare into the defining moment of his public persona. His response to Carlsen's table slam was a masterclass in emotional intelligence and strategic communication. Instead of playing the victim or taking shots at his opponent, Gyökç said something that completely reframed the entire narrative. I've also banged a lot of tables in my career. When you care this much about the game, emotions run high. I understand completely. Those two sentences did more to establish Gyökç as a mature, thoughtful leader than any marketing campaign could have achieved. In one moment, he showed empathy for his opponent, demonstrated his own competitive fire, and positioned himself as someone who understood the emotional intensity of elite chess. It was perfect, and it was completely authentic. But the brilliance of Gyökç's response goes even deeper than that. By expressing understanding for Carlsen's reaction, he actually elevated the significance of his own victory. Think about it. If beating Gyökç could make Magnus Carlsen, the most composed player in chess history, lose his cool completely, what does that say about Gyökç's level of play? The table slam became inadvertent testimony to just how good the young world champion really is. The chess world took notice immediately. Suddenly, everyone was talking about Gyökç's maturity, his grace under pressure, his leadership qualities. Sponsors started calling. Media outlets wanted interviews. Chess organizations began positioning him as the face of the new generation. What could have been a footnote to Carlsen's emotional outburst became the launching pad for Gyökç's emergence as a global chess superstar. But here's what makes Gyökç's rise even more remarkable. He's not just winning games, he's changing how people think about chess champions. Previous generations of chess stars often cultivated an air of mystery or intellectual superiority. Gyökç is different. He's approachable, articulate, and genuinely interested in growing the game. He gives thoughtful interviews, engages with fans on social media, and consistently uses his platform to promote chess education and development. The impact on his career trajectory has been astronomical. Before the Carlsen victory, Gyöks was certainly respected as world champion, but he was still seen as part of a group of talented young players. After his graceful handling of the table slam incident, he emerged as the clear leader of his generation, not just in terms of chess ability, but in terms of character and leadership. The commercial opportunities have followed accordingly. Major brands that had been hesitant to invest heavily in chess are now lining up to associate with Gyöks. His combination of elite performance, authentic personality, and mature public presence makes him an ideal spokesperson for companies looking to reach younger demographics. Chess equipment manufacturers, educational technology companies, and even mainstream consumer brands are all vying for partnerships. But perhaps most importantly, Gyöks has become a role model for young chess players around the world, particularly in India and other developing chess nations. His success story, rising from a relatively modest background to become world champion through dedication and hard work, resonates with millions of aspiring players. His graceful handling of success and controversy provides a template for how to conduct oneself as a chess professional. The long-term implications are staggering. Gyöks isn't just the current world champion, he's positioning himself to be the face of chess for the next decade or more. His combination of playing strength, personal character, and media savvy makes him uniquely qualified to carry the sport forward into a new era. The table slam incident, which could have derailed his moment of triumph, instead became the catalyst that launched him into chess superstardom. What happened next was something I've never seen in my years of following chess, an entire global community having a collective existential crisis in real time. The combination of Carlsen's emotional outburst, the racist backlash against Gyöks, and the ongoing FI dress code controversy created a perfect storm that forced the chess world to confront some uncomfortable truths about itself. And let me tell you, what emerged from that soul-searching was both disturbing and hopeful in equal measure. The first major revelation was just how deep the fault lines in the chess community really run. For years, these tensions had been simmering beneath the surface: generational conflicts between old-school traditionalists and modern players, cultural clashes between different chess-playing nations, philosophical disagreements about the direction of the sport. But the events of 2025 brought all of these conflicts into the open simultaneously, creating a reckoning that nobody could ignore. The emotional expression debate became a lightning rod for broader questions about what chess should be. On one side, you had traditionalists arguing that chess was supposed to be a gentleman's game, a battle of minds conducted with dignity and restraint. They saw Carlsen's table slam as a betrayal of chess's intellectual heritage, a descent into the kind of emotional theatrics that belonged in other sports but not in chess. On the other side, a growing movement of players, fans, and commentators argued that chess's obsession with emotional restraint was actually holding the sport back. They pointed out that the most popular chess content on social media featured players showing genuine emotion, excitement over brilliant moves, frustration over blunders, joy in victory, and disappointment in defeat. "We've been trying to turn chess players into emotionless computers," argued one prominent chess streamer, "when what people actually want to see is human beings having human reactions to an incredibly demanding game." The racism issue forced an even more uncomfortable conversation. For years, the chess community had prided itself on being a meritocracy where only results mattered. The idea that chess was somehow above the racial and cultural prejudices that plagued other areas of society was a comforting myth that many people wanted to believe. But the vicious attacks on Gyöks after his victory shattered that illusion completely. Chess organizations around the world were forced to confront the reality that their sport had a serious diversity and inclusion problem. It wasn't just about the racist comments on social media, though those were bad enough. It was about the systemic barriers that had kept chess predominantly white and male for decades, the cultural assumptions that made players from certain backgrounds feel unwelcome, and the institutional blindness that had allowed these problems to persist. The response was swift but also revealed how unprepared the chess world was to deal with these issues. FI issued statements condemning racism, but critics pointed out that the organization had no real mechanisms for addressing discrimination or supporting players who faced harassment. Chess.com and other platforms started implementing stricter moderation policies, but the sheer volume of offensive content made enforcement difficult. More importantly, the incident sparked conversations about representation and opportunity in chess. Why were there so few players of color at the highest levels? Why did chess remain so demographically narrow despite being played by millions of people from diverse backgrounds around the world? These weren't comfortable questions for a community that had always assumed it was naturally inclusive. The FI dress code controversy added another layer to the soul-searching, raising fundamental questions about governance and authority in chess. The jeans incident wasn't really about clothing. It was about whether chess's governing bodies were serving the interests of players and fans, or whether they had become bureaucratic obstacles to the sport's growth and development. Players started organizing in ways that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. Social media gave them platforms to voice criticisms directly to fans without going through traditional chess media. Streaming and content creation provided alternative revenue sources that reduced their dependence on traditional tournament organizers. For the first time in chess history, elite players had real leverage to demand changes. The most significant development was the emergence of what some people started calling the new chess movement, a loose coalition of players, content creators, and fans who wanted to modernize the sport's culture, governance, and presentation. They weren't trying to destroy chess's traditions, but they were demanding that those traditions serve the game's future rather than constraining it. This movement gained momentum when several top players started publicly supporting reforms, more flexible dress codes, better prize funds, improved tournament conditions, stronger anti-discrimination policies, and more democratic governance structures. What started as individual complaints began coalescing into a coherent reform agenda. The establishment's response was predictably mixed. Some organizations embraced the calls for change, recognizing that the sport needed to evolve to remain relevant. Others dug in their heels, arguing that chess's traditions were what made it special and that changing them would destroy the game's essential character. But perhaps the most important outcome of this soul-searching was a new level of self-awareness within the chess community. People started having honest conversations about the sport's problems instead of pretending they didn't exist. Players began speaking out about issues they had previously kept private. Fans started demanding better from the organizations that claimed to represent them. The process was messy, sometimes ugly, and far from complete. But it was also necessary and ultimately healthy. Chess was finally growing up, confronting its flaws, and beginning the difficult work of becoming the inclusive, modern sport that its global popularity deserved. The chess world stands at a crossroads unlike any in its 1,500-year history, and what happens next will determine whether this ancient game thrives in the modern era or becomes a relic of the past. The events of 2025, from Carlsen's table slam to Gyökçe's graceful rise, from the jeans controversy to the racist backlash, weren't isolated incidents. They were symptoms of a sport in the middle of a fundamental transformation, and the choices made in the coming months and years will shape chess for generations to come. The most immediate change is already happening. The power structure of professional chess is shifting in ways that would have been unimaginable just a decade ago. For the first time in the sport's history, individual players have more influence than the organizations that claim to govern them. Magnus Carlsen can withdraw from a tournament over jeans and make international headlines. Gyökçe can reframe an entire controversy with a single gracious statement. Top players can threaten boycotts and actually have the leverage to make those threats meaningful. This shift is being driven by technology and economics in ways that chess traditionalists are still struggling to understand. Streaming platforms, social media, and online chess sites have created new revenue streams that don't depend on traditional tournament organizers or governing bodies. A top player can now make more money from streaming and content creation than from tournament prizes. That economic independence translates directly into political power. The implications are staggering. We're likely to see more player-driven initiatives, more direct challenges to established authorities, and more demands for transparency and accountability from chess organizations. The old model, where FIDE and other governing bodies made decisions behind closed doors and expected players to comply, is dying. The new model will be more democratic, more responsive to player concerns, and more focused on growing the game rather than preserving bureaucratic power. But the transformation goes deeper than just politics and economics. The very culture of chess is evolving, and the generational divide we saw in the Carlsen-Gyöks matchup is just the beginning. The players coming up now grew up with engines, online chess, and social media. They think differently about the game, approach competition differently, and have different expectations about what professional chess should look like. This new generation is more diverse, more globally distributed, and more comfortable with technology than any previous cohort of chess players. They're also more willing to challenge traditions that don't serve the game's interests. The dress code controversy won't be the last time we see young players pushing back against outdated rules and expectations. The racism issue, while painful to confront, has also created an opportunity for meaningful change. The chess community's response to the attacks on Gyöks showed that there's a real appetite for making the sport more inclusive and welcoming. We're likely to see new initiatives focused on diversity and inclusion, better support systems for players from underrepresented backgrounds, and more aggressive enforcement of anti-discrimination policies. The commercial implications are equally significant. Chess is experiencing unprecedented growth in popularity, driven largely by online platforms and streaming content. But that growth has been uneven, with most of the benefits flowing to a small number of top players and content creators. The events of 2025 have highlighted the need for more equitable distribution of chess's growing commercial success. We're likely to see new business models emerge that better serve the broader chess community. Player unions or associations may form to negotiate better conditions and prize funds. Alternative tournament formats and organizations may challenge FIDE's monopoly on elite chess. The relationship between chess and entertainment will continue to evolve, with more emphasis on creating engaging content for fans. The technological transformation of chess will also accelerate. The success of online platforms during the pandemic showed that chess doesn't need to be confined to traditional tournament halls. We're likely to see more hybrid events, more innovative formats, and more integration between online and offline chess. The distinction between real chess and online chess will continue to blur. Perhaps most importantly, the events of 2025 have shown that chess has the potential to be much more than just a board game. It can be a platform for discussing important social issues, a vehicle for cultural exchange, and a force for positive change in the world. But realizing that potential will require the chess community to continue the difficult work of self-examination and reform that began this year. The road ahead won't be easy. There will be more controversies, more conflicts between old and new approaches, and more growing pains as the sport evolves. But there's also tremendous reason for optimism. Chess has never been more popular, more accessible, or more globally diverse than it is today. The passion and intelligence of the chess community, demonstrated even in the midst of controversy, suggests that the sport has the resources and resilience to navigate this transformation successfully. The table slam heard round the world wasn't just about one player's emotional reaction to a loss. It was the sound of a sport breaking free from its constraints and beginning to realize its full potential. What comes next will determine whether that potential is fulfilled or squandered. But one thing is certain, chess will never be the same again, and that might be exactly what it needs to secure its future in an ever-changing world. The game that has survived for 15 centuries is about to write its most important chapter yet. And we all get to watch it unfold, one move at a time.